Father Mayo. Listening to the recent confession where mention was made of the Glasgow Rozzers, I was... let's not get into that again, because that isn't a particularly Glaswegian term. It was just like an ad-lib that happened at the time. I was reminded of an unfortunate incident in which I was involved in 1992. Back then, I was a young, fresh-faced and naive probationary constable in Glasgow, and on the day in question, I was sent to see the duty officer, Inspector Jardine. It's yourself, young Stuart. No, I'm not going to even attempt. But,
really?
Yes. It's yourself, young Stuart, he said. And when I arrived, there's a prisoner I need watching. He's only been brought in a few hours ago, and he's ranting and fighting with everybody. Now, you'll only need to watch him for an hour or so. Then you'll be relieved by an officer from Bishop Briggs, as he's their prisoner. But I'll check on him in a wee while if he's calmed down. I'll release him for a report. OK. Keep him calm. I thought, keep him calm and he'll get out. Easy enough. I realised if all went well, I could still make the big card school, which took place during the refreshment break at 3 a.m. These are very important issues.
Different times.
Maybe. Ian Rankin could have written this one.
Yeah.
Satisfied this was something I could handle, I took the lift to the 4th floor, where the observation cell was situated. But instead of a ranting and raving prisoner, my man was tucked up in his blue plastic-covered mattress and fast asleep. Delighted that an easy night and a card game was ahead of me, I settled down to the deep recesses of the easy chair and I picked up a magazine. Shortly afterwards, my prisoner aroused from his slumbers and, peeking out from under his itchy blanket, looked, I have to say, rather alarmed. The prisoner then got up and signalled through the glass wall that he urgently wanted to speak with me. I went out into the cell passageway, where I then opened the small hatch in the middle of the sturdy steel cell door. The prisoner, who turned out to be a well-spoken chap from the leafy suburbs, clearly didn't know where he was. So he asked me. He feared the very worst when I said he'd been arrested, because he said, "Don't you come in here." What's wrong with that? What's wrong?
Okay.
It's my leafy suburb voice.
Yes, it is, isn't it?
Don't you come in here. I've seen that film, Midnight Express. I don't want you in here. On learning the grisly details of his arrest for going daft inside and then outside a pub in sleepy Kirkintilloch, followed by a bout of going bananas at the charge bar and assaulting various police officers, he muttered the now ubiquitous excuse for public buffoonery, which was, "Somebody must have spiked my drink, boss," which is what he said. But of greater concern to the gentleman, it turned out, were the presence or whereabouts of his new Timberland boots. A birthday gift from his wife, as it turned out. "Don't worry," I said, as I picked up the boots from outside his cell and I showed them to him. "What about my jacket?" he says, as he turned his head sideways and poked it out of the hatch for a good look at the floor. "Right, what about my jacket?" He's looking there. "Yes, it's here too. Now pop your head back into the cell. The duty officer is going to visit you soon, and if you're calm, you can go home." "OK, boss," says the prisoner, who then attempted to pull his head back through the hatch.
Oh, no.
Whereupon it became wedged fast. Realising we had a predicament between us, we attempted the only course of action we knew. He pulled inwards whilst I pushed on the crown of his head. However, it wouldn't budge, and our technique was apparently quite painful, as the prisoner's ears bent back and forwards like the flapping gills of a stranded fish.
Oh, lovely. What a picture.
It was at this point I heard the approach of the service lift and surmised correctly that Inspector Jardine would soon be with us. This meant that not only was I in big trouble, but more importantly, there would be no card school for me that morning. Inspired by my rising panic, I rushed down the corridor to the sink as the prisoner howled away in agony. To make matters worse, the other prisoners on the floor were now rousing and clearly not best pleased, as they shouted a number of words that I hadn't heard before and won't be writing down here. At the sink, I picked up the bar of pink carbolic soap, soaked it in water, ran back to the cell hatch and rubbed the prisoner's now bright red ears vigorously. Suitably soaped up, I then gave one last strong shove to the top of his head and he popped back into the cell. If you'll imagine, like the opposite of a champagne cork coming out of the bottle. It's not really like that at all. I closed the hatch just as the lift doors opened, plonked back down in my seat and picked up the magazine as if I'd been there for ages. As Inspector Jardine walked into the room, the prisoner was hopping frantically about his cell in the style of John Cleese's Basil Fawlty, clutching his swollen ears and screaming blue murder, accompanied by the very grumpy shouts from the other prisoners. "Oh, dear goodness," exclaimed the inspector, as Glaswegian inspectors are prone to do. "We'll need to keep this man for the court. He needs to be seen by the duty psychiatrist." Standing to attention, I replied, "Yes, sir. He's been like this for some time, and I didn't want to disturb you, sir." "Well, Father Mayo, I seek forgiveness not only for my careless inattention that followed the poor prisoner to poke his head out of his cell hatch, contrary to forced standing orders and common sense, nor do I seek forgiveness for the extra paperwork, such as risk forms, that I caused for my inspector through not fessing up. But instead I seek your forgiveness, your compassionate forgiveness, for my transgression against my dear older and wiser colleague Roger from the neighbouring Bishop Briggs police force, who had to spend the rest of the long, long night watching the prisoner when he should have instead been tucked up in his panda car on Little Hill Golf Course with a cup of coffee. He also missed the big card school that night, which had a top prize of £10. Yeah. Anyway, it's the latest from Superintendent Stewart, which Ian Rankin would knock that up into his latest bestseller in a couple of years' time. Or maybe just a little incident in there. Well, it had a little bit of carry-on in there as well. Superintendent Stewart, what do you think of that, Sister Bobby?
Well, Superintendent Stewart, I don't know why he just didn't come clean. Because what that meant is the prisoner couldn't go home, and obviously they were upset. So
I think he was going to get into trouble for allowing the prisoner to stick his head out the window.
So it'd be his fault. So basically, yeah, but of course then two other things happened that are not fair. Yeah, because prisoner Big Boots got kept in for longer than he should have done. Then his friend, no, I don't. Superintendent Stewart, although funny, very funny, you are not forgiven.
Yeah, that's certainly true, because he did allow the prisoner to stay in there for a lot longer.
Well,
yeah.
Yes, I mean, here's the point. He had no control over prisoner Big Boots deciding to stick his head out of a cell hatch. Now, I have limited knowledge of the size of cell hatches, but from having watched the bill, they're really tiny things. Who thinks they're going to stick their head through that and be
Someone
able to
with a small head?
Absolutely, yes. And
from the leafy suburbs of Glasgow.
Clearly, with that accent. So I'm going to forgive, because he doesn't have any control over your man and his teeny tiny wee head. And also great reference to Midnight Express. What a great movie. So I am going to forgive